social enterprise and socially responsible business. The business of doing good is extremely difficult. Every business, from the person who sells you a humble bunch of matches to the person who sells you common salt, are all giving a social benefit, not only a commercial activity. You can test it. What if there was no one around to sell you a box of matches or the common salt? Yet when we talk of social responsibility and social enterprise, we are not talking about those intrinsic social benefits that come from the ordinary business of business. For we do expect that every service or good has intrinsic merit and benefit to satisfy needs, wants, and expectations. So when we talk of social responsibility and social enterprise, we are talking of something markedly different and specifically and purposefully beneficial beyond the ordinary business of delivering goods and services. So that's the general context. Now, on the other hand, if you take charities, non-governmental organizations, community organizations, whose purpose is indeed to deliver social benefit, they too are not alien to business. In fact, Mr. Manjang is an accountant. In the old days, if you're studying accounting, you get your trial balance, you know how to do your trial balance, you learn how to do your profit and loss account, and then they teach you how to do the profit and loss account version of a not-for-profit business organization, and that would be the income and expenditure account. But Mr. Manjang, you will remember at the top part of the income, they would have an element called bar trading, because even then there is an expectation that there would be trading, the issue of selling and buying. To this day, the most social of community organizations or charities may organize a bring and buy sale or a sponsorship that is indeed trading. So then these two things of social benefit and trading are not mutually exclusive. So the discourse of social economy is really the discussion of the conjuncture between society and economy, and that brings us on a spectrum. So it's a discussion of the calibration on that spectrum rather than absolutes, because there are no absolutes. There is social benefit in business and there is business in social organizations. Thus, and this issue of how do you calibrate it well have troubled thinkers and reformers and activists for centuries. And it has troubled quite a lot faith people. I think of the Quaker entrepreneurs, and I think in the past 20 years of the Islamic finance entrepreneurs, and I think of the pioneers of the cooperative movements. It had troubled people for a very long time as to how to get the calibration correct. Perhaps the oldest form of social enterprise, well structured, is the cooperative movement. In colonial Gambia and in the first 10, 15 years of post-colonial Gambia, cooperatives were a thriving form of enterprise. And these are either the worker cooperatives or indeed the consumer cooperatives, whereby the delivery of social benefit but using business tools was the framework to do it. That goes back, the international cooperative alliance was set up, I think it was 1895, with the 7 principles of the cooperative movement. So that's been quite a long time in the setting. Now, today, one of the biggest cooperatives is a Spanish one called Mondragon. And Mondragon is amongst the top 15 companies in all of Spain. It has a turnover of 12 billion euros and a capitalization of about 24 billion euros. So social enterprise in that sense, cooperatives, are not small business. They are indeed big business. The structures they take, in Gambia, I think now there's a dearth of those structures because the cooperative movement has suffered quite a lot. But there's a healthy credit union community in the Gambia, which is a form of mutualization, and mutuals generally represent an important part of cooperatives and social enterprises. Even before we had the phrase corporate social responsibility, way back in the beginning of the 20th century, philosopher Carl Jung was troubled with this matter, and his sense about the problem between companies and doing good, he said, is because the company does not have a soul for God to damn it. The company doesn't have a soul for it to be damned. That was his sense of why it is so difficult to get the calibration right. But it's more difficult than that. And it's full of moral hazards as well. Take the Quaker entrepreneurs. Even during the Industrial Revolution in Europe, sanitation and the quality of water was so poor that, believe it or not, the poor people were better off drinking alcohol than drinking water, because the alcohol is processed, and so it was safer. And of course, these poor people became, of course, addicted to alcohol, thus the English phrase that drink is the curse of the working classes. The Quaker entrepreneurs thought, and of course, that it is bad to drink, so they thought they needed an alternative processed drink to replace alcohol. And they invented what is now the confectionery industry by producing hot chocolate and all the sweets. So from the Cadburys to the Roundtrees, these were Quaker entrepreneurs who said, we will use business, but we are motivated by a moral and a social purpose. Of course, what's the moral hazard in that? The whole confectionery business, not only isn't it bad for your health, it also was based on slavery. So you see the moral conundrum of trying to get this calibration right. Now, from the economics point of view, the fundamental problem has been, who is the owner of surplus in the businesses we run? We all agree the factors of production. So even the Marxian economists, they belong to the canon of classical economics. It's about who owns surplus. It used to be the landowners, because they give you land, they extract all of the rent and the surplus. They were the aristocrats. Then you had the capitalists in the industrial period who are bringing the capital to cash and they're extracting the surplus. Then there was an argument that it should belong to the entrepreneurs who motivate and bring in all of the other factors. And of course, we know that the Marxian economists tell us that surplus should belong to labor. So now we have moved so far that in the past 20, 30 years, there are international standards on how to get the calibration. And the most important one is the UN Compact. the UN Global Compact sets 10 principles as to what constitutes a company with extremely high levels of corporate social responsibility. And they break those 10 points in 4 themes. Number 1 in the theme is human rights, and there's 2 points. That is the recognition of human rights and not to be complicit in the abuse of human rights. So companies under the Global Compact, that's the first theme. The second theme is all about labor, fairness of wages, recognition of collective bargaining, but also the ratio between the lowest earning members of the company and the highest earning members of the company. So if you go to Mondragon, for example, the highest ratio would be 9:1. That is, those on the lowest income, those on the highest income, their income is 9 times more. In the rampant capitalist companies, it may be 1,000 times more. But we've got this as a global standard on how to try to measure or set your responsibility levels. Then the third theme is on environment and environmental responsibility. And the last theme is anti-corruption in its all broad interpretation, not only the giving, but the facilitating and the getting. So that's the framework that we have. It exists right now. In the context of the Gambia, I think the lesson is similar to what's happening in other parts of Africa, that corporate responsibility should really go beyond the donations, the sponsorships, to institutionalization through foundations and the vesting of shareholding into those foundations. We come back to the Quakers and their companies. Many of them, when they passed away, their wills, they gave money to their family, and the biggest part of their shareholdings went into trusts. Those trusts are worth billions of dollars, and every year they disperse hundreds of millions of pounds. I want to conclude by bringing your attention to what I call the unknown Tata. If I say Tata, T-A-T-A, would people know that name in this room? Almost everybody. Tata, that's the multinational Indian company, set up 1868 by Jasmetin Tata. Now, Tata is worth, its turnover every year, it's $100 billion. $100 billion. Its capitalization is about $130 billion. It is one of the social enterprises that is too shy to identify itself as a social enterprise. And why is it too shy? It's because in its group of 400 companies include 30 publicly listed companies, and they all behave like any multinational company. But 66% of the shareholding of Tata, which is worth $130 billion in capitalization, is owned by the Tata Trusts. It's owned by the Tata Trust. So it is not the entrepreneurs who, after extracting surplus, say, I now give a donation of so much, I now give a sponsorship of so much. They still do it, but they've institutionalized it by giving shares and ownership in these companies. And this is a remarkable story relating to Tata. But there is an unknown Tata. Do you know the Tata of Nigeria? Maybe not. One generation after Tata, 1876, around 1890, a young Hausa trader, a trader in Colonial from Kano to Accra, called Al-Hassan Dan Tata, became an extremely wealthy man. When he died in 1955, he was possibly the wealthiest African around. Dan Tata, in his dying bed, he called his sons and his financial manager, and he begged them. He said, do not kill the company. I make this point because it was an attempt to stop what has been a problem with African companies, that is the lack of continuity through the lack of institutionalization of the body corporate and the sharing and passing over of shares. Dan Tata brought his family and his trusted financial manager and begged them. Long story short, the company survived, but it survived to this day as really it's worth about 300 million. That, in terms of where it began from, is a small company. Tata of India is worth 100 billion. Tata of Nigeria, the original, is worth 300 million. But at least it exists. Many other wealthy people, I decidedly chosen not to give a Gambian case study. But many cases, there is no company today to talk about, let alone talk about any philanthropy. Interestingly, in 1977, the grandson of Al-Hassan Dan Tata, called Abdul Qadir Sanusi Dan Tata, was approached by his 20-year-old nephew, the son of Maria Sanusi Dan Tata, and borrowed money from his uncle. Apparently, it was $1 million. That 20-year-old is Dangote, the wealthiest African today. Perhaps there's a lesson about continuity through incorporation, and one hopes that in 30 years' time, in 50 years' time, in 100 years' time, the Dangote legacy would be comparable to the Tata of India legacy. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.